They are not there. नहीं, let me ask them. हाँ, दोनों माइक चाहिए होगा. Correct. Morning, sir. ठीक है, thank you. It's a kind request to all of you, please be seated. Hello, our valuable guests, please be seated over there so that we can start the next session. And next session is, I think, are all panelists are over there so that we can start the next session. अगला सत्र शुरू करने के लिए सभी से निवेदन है, कृपया आप लोग बैठ जाएं ताकि हम लोग अगले सत्र की शुरुआत कर सकें. समय हो चुका है और ये जो विषय है यह है वर्तमान समय में भारतीय लेखों का फंतासी कथा साहित्य. फैंटेसी, इमेजिनेशन जो लेखन का आधार होता है वो वर्तमान समय में क्या योगदान है इसका साहित्य में. सो फैंटेसी फिक्शन बाय इंडियन राइटर्स इन कंटेम्प्रेरी पीरियड, वी आर जस्ट गोइंग टू टॉक अबाउट दैट. और मैं निवेदन करती हूँ हमारे बीच हमारे जो पैनलिस्ट हैं, जो अध्यक्ष हैं. सो इट्स अ काइंड रिक्वेस्ट एंड मोस्ट वेलकम ध्रुव ज्योति बोरा सर, जो आज यहाँ अध्यक्षता कर रहे हैं इस पैनल की. इनके बारे में परिचय दे दूं. ध्रुव ज्योति बोरा प्रख्यात असमिया कथा लेखक, इतिहासकार, निबंधकार, चित्रकार और कलाकार हैं. It's again a kind request to please be seated, all of you. We are just starting. We have started our next session. आपकी उल्लेखनीय कृतियों में शामिल है कथा रत्नाकर, तेजोर अंधर, अर्थ, लोहा, कलंतरार गद्य आदि. आपके कॉलम नियमित रूप से प्रमुख दैनिक समाचार पत्रों में प्रकाशित होते रहते हैं. आपकी रचनाओं का अन्य भारतीय भाषाओं में बड़े पैमाने पर अनुवाद किया गया है. आप अंबिकागिरी राय चौधरी पुरस्कार, साहित्य अकादमी पुरस्कार आदि से सम्मानित हैं. वर्तमान में आप फखरुद्दीन अली अहमद मेडिकल कॉलेज बरपेटा के प्राचार्य हैं. बहुत बहुत स्वागत है सर आपका. इसके साथ ही हमारे और जो पैनलिस्ट हैं मैं सभी का स्वागत करती हूँ. हमारे बीच अनुजा चंद्रमौली हैं. अनुजा चंद्रमौली, प्लीज़ कम ऑन द स्टेज. सभी लोग मंच पर आते जाएं, मैं सभी का स्वागत करती हूँ. हमारे बीच बोधिसत्व जी हैं मंच पर, बहुत स्वागत सर. हमारे बीच केवी मोहन कुमार हैं, कृपया मंच पर आ जाएं, बहुत स्वागत है. मुकुल कुमार हमारे बीच हैं. मुकुल कुमार. निर्मल कांति भट्टाचार्य जी हमारे बीच हैं, बहुत बहुत स्वागत है आप सभी का. मुकुल जी हमारे बीच नहीं है, जी आए. मुकुल जी का भी बहुत बहुत स्वागत है. मैं निवेदन करूंगी ध्रुव ज्योति बोरा सर से. यू आर सपोज टू स्टार्ट द सेशन एंड देन आई विल इंट्रोड्यूस वन बाय वन ऑल द पैनलिस्ट एंड देन दे विल स्टार्ट. सो इज इट हैंडेड ओवर टू ध्रुव ज्योति बोरा सर.
Fine.
No, I have got the list and I have to call them accordingly only. So firstly, Anuja Chandramani is there.
But can you not change the year?
Okay, you can. Of course you can. You have the right. You can come on. So firstly, Bodhisattva. Should I call him now?
He's there. No, I'll speak a few words and you call him.
Sure.
It seems that the subject is such. Panelists are more than the audience. So that may possibly speak a little about what actually we are going to discuss. See, I consider it as a very important aspect of evolving literary scene worldwide and also in India. We are trying to create a new genre of fiction writing and trying to label it as fantasy fiction. If you want to say that all fictions are fantasy, it deals with fantasy. But why then have a special genre called exclusively fantasy fiction. Now my panelists are such eminent persons and so much more experienced in the realm of literature. They will be able to shed light as to what it does involve and what is the purpose of creating such a genre. So we have seen the likes of this kind of fiction being the largest seller in the world, largest seller of book. Say, if you include Harry Potter and the series, that I think typically exemplifies what is fantasy fiction. Or Tolkien's series of Hobbit and all this. This is, of course, in the West. Here in India, what I have seen is that we are also developing our own kind of fantasy fiction, and for that, rather than totally imaginary subjects, we are going more and more into our mythology. We are trying to delve into the depths of our own mythological heritage and trying to create fantasy and produce fiction out of it. Whereas, say, whether it is Harry Potter, it has got nothing in the either in the heritage, it's entirely imagined. Hobbit of Tolkien is entirely imaginary things. They have no existence either in the psyche or in the history or in the heritage anywhere. Of course, there may be that in England had got that tradition of black magic from a very long time. So in this context, the first thing that possibly we will have to do is define what is fantasy fiction. When our Rishi Munis went into philosophical religious debates, the first thing they insisted from each other is define yourself. Define what you are going to say or trying to establish. For example, they might be debating about, say, nirvana and moksha. Now it has to be defined, or otherwise you cannot go forward. Even the Greek philosophers, Aristotle, Plato, Aristophanes, everybody, first question was always define yourself. Now we will have to define what is fantasy fiction, what is contemporary period, and who are the writers we will be discussing, and what is the character. So I have asked one of my co-panelists, Bodhisattva, to first, I told him that I'll ask you to define these things. When you start your, define and then start. So I see a very little role for my own self as a chair, because with such a brilliant panel, I only have to smile and say, yes, 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 yes. So with these words, welcoming all of you to this discussion today morning, I would ask our to call Bodhisattva first.
थैंक यू सो मच सर, मोस्ट वेलकम। अगला स्वागत है बोधिसत्व जी का। बोधिसत्व प्रतिष्ठित कवि, समालोचक, शोधकर्ता तथा पटकथा लेखक हैं। आपके 4 कविता संग्रह प्रकाशित हैं, जिनमें सिर्फ कवि नहीं तथा खत्म होती नहीं बात प्रमुख हैं। आपने वृषोत्सर्ग नामक लंबी कथा भी लिखी है। इसके अलावा आपकी तार सप्तक कवियों के काव्य सिद्धांत तथा महाभारत का यथार्थ जैसी आलोचनात्मक कृतियां भी प्रकाशित हैं। आपने 3 उल्लेखनीय संकलनों का संपादन भी किया है। इसके अतिरिक्त आपने शिखर जैसे फिल्मों तथा आम्रपाली, 1857 क्रांति तथा देवों के देव महादेव जैसे प्रमुख टेलीविज़न धारावाहिकों के लिए लेखन भी किया है। आपको भारत भूषण अग्रवाल सम्मान, गिरिजा कुमार माथुर सम्मान, फिराक गोरखपुरी सम्मान तथा शमशेर सम्मान सहित कई अन्य प्रतिष्ठित पुरस्कारों से सम्मानित किया जा चुका है। बहुत स्वागत सर आपका।
आप सभी को मेरा प्रणाम। ये मेरे लिए बड़ा चैलेंजिंग पैनल है और आप लोग तो हैं ही हैं प्रबुद्ध श्रोता। तो जो हमारा आज का सब्जेक्ट है उस पर मैं जो मेरी सूझ है वो कहूँगा और मैं निवेदन करूँगा अपने सीनियर लोगों से कि मेरे ऊपर नाराज़ नहीं हो जाएंगे, क्योंकि जो आज का विषय है उस पर बोलने के लिए मैं अपने को बहुत उपयुक्त वक्ता नहीं पाता हूँ। फिर भी मैं एक कोशिश करता हूँ कि मैं अपनी कुछ बात कह पाऊँ। पहली बात तो मैं यहीं से शुरू करता हूँ कि ये दोनों ही शब्द जो है फिक्शन और फैंटेसी, वो भारतीय साहित्य में किस तरह उपस्थित हैं, क्योंकि ये दोनों ही हमारी परंपरा के शब्द फिलहाल के लिए नहीं हैं। ये दोनों ही एक तरह से हमारे हो गए हैं लेकिन हमारे रहे नहीं हैं। अगर इनके एडॉप्ट कर लेने के बाद की स्थितियों पर बात करें तो इनके लिए जो हिंदी में शब्द इनसे बने हैं वो तो बने ही, जैसे फैंटासी एक शब्द चला हुआ है, लेकिन फिक्शन के लिए तो अभी भी वैसा कुछ नहीं है। अगर आप लोग भोजपुरी और मिथिला और अवधी की शब्दावली को समझते होंगे या बांग्ला की शब्दावली को समझते होंगे तो मैथिली और हिंदी में एक शब्द है अजुगुत। फैंटेसी के बहुत करीब है ये शब्द और फिक्शन के भी बहुत करीब है गल्प। अगर अच्छा झूठ बोलने वाला हो तो बंगला में लोग बोलते हैं गप कर रहा है, गप्पी है। हमारे यहाँ वो गपोड़ी है। अगर अब हम इसको साहित्य में ट्रांसलेट करें तो जितनी बेहतर संकल्पना हो सकती है, जितनी अधिक काल्पनिक उड़ान हो सकती है, वो सारा कुछ फिक्शन है। और उस फिक्शन के लिए आवश्यक नहीं है कि यथार्थ का कोई जामा हो, वो बिना रियलिटी के भी वर्क करता है। जिन 2 फिल्मों और सीरीज की बात की सर ने, हैरी पॉटर और लॉर्ड ऑफ द रिंग या इस तरह की बहुत सारी कहानियाँ हैं, या अगर हम अपने यहाँ कथा सरित सागर और पंचतंत्र, किस्सा तोता मैना, सिंहासन बत्तीसी, बेताल पचीसी और किस्सा शीत बसंत, या इस तरह की जो बहुत सारी और रशियन लिटरेचर की कहानियाँ हैं जो रहस्यनामा सीरीज के अंतर्गत छपी हुई हैं, या अगर हम रामायण और महाभारत में जो फैंटासी की एक दुनिया है जो है या नहीं है, लेकिन उसकी होने की संभावना उसके लिखे जाने में है। मैं उन कथाओं पर आऊँगा। इसमें दोनों का जो संबंध है फैंटेसी और फिक्शन का, फैंटेसी का पूरा एग्जिस्टेंस ही फिक्शन की डिटेल पे है। अगर मैं एक विज्ञान कथा लिखता हूँ, आप लोगों ने रामकुमार वर्मा का एक एकांकी नाटक है, एकांकी है छाया, कभी 1955-60 के आसपास एकांकी उन्होंने लिखी थी, जिसमें उन्होंने कैसे यंत्र की कल्पना की, एक मशीन की कल्पना की, जिसमें एक खास एटमॉस्फेयर में आप दूसरे ग्रहों में जा चुके लोगों का आवाहन कर सकते हैं, और उस यंत्र का नाम दिया एपराटूअस। और उसमें जो प्रेमी वैज्ञानिक है वो अपनी प्रेमिका का आवाहन करता है और यंत्र खराब हो जाता है, आ जाने के बाद यंत्र बिगड़ जाता है, और मुश्किल ये है कि उसको लेके वो रह नहीं सकता और उसको भेज भी नहीं पा रहा है। तो फैंटेसी और फिक्शन में वहाँ से एक सामाजिक यथार्थ भी जुड़ता है, जो उस लेखक की अपनी देखी हुई दुनिया, अपनी जी हुई दुनिया होती है। क्योंकि विज्ञान की कथा भी हम क्यों पढ़ रहे हैं? हम किस्सा तोता मैना या देवकी नंदन खत्री के उपन्यासों को क्यों पढ़ रहे हैं? क्योंकि उनके भीतर भी एक मानवता की यात्रा होती रहती है। जैसे रामकुमार वर्मा की इसी एकांकी में, कि उसका ये दुख समझ में नहीं आ रहा है कि जो अपने मृत मित्र को बुला लिया, इसको भेजें कैसे और रखें कहाँ, क्योंकि यंत्र के बाहर लौटा देने की ताकत नहीं है, आ तो गई है। तो फिक्शन में भी एक यथार्थ का जामा हमेशा ही रहा है। मैं कुछ दूसरी रचनाओं के माध्यम से बात करूंगा। जैसे एक उदाहरण के लिए कि मैं इस तरह से देखता हूं कि मुंशी प्रेमचंद जो है वो भारतीय समाज के यथार्थ के सबसे बड़े फिक्शन लेखक हैं, क्योंकि वो कहते सच हैं, लेकिन वो जो सच की डिटेल है वो बिना फिक्शन के संभव नहीं है। अगर हीरा ने अपने बड़े भाई होरी की गाय को जहर दिया है, वो जो विष देने का विवरण है वो बिना अच्छे फिक्शन राइटर हुए आप नहीं कर सकते, बिना अच्छी कल्पनाशीलता के आप उसे संभव नहीं कर सकते। अगर इसको मैं किसी पौराणिक कथा के द्वारा अगर इसको मैं कहना चाहूँ तो मैं दो उदाहरण देना चाहूँगा। सीता को वनवास समाप्त होने और रावण के संहार के बाद जब वापसी हो जाती है, तो जो सीता परित्याग की घटना है उस पर कम से कम 30 पुराने लेखकों ने 30 तरह से लिखा है। सबकी रीजनिंग अलग है, सबका तरीका अलग है, सब में सीता की अपनी व्यथा अलग है, सब में सीता का अपना दुख अलग है, राम से उनके संबंध अलग हैं। लेकिन भारतीय मानस में एक यथार्थ कथा की तरह हुए है कि सीता का निष्कासन हुआ, लेकिन जब उसके निकाले जाने के दायरे में हम जाते हैं तो कहीं धोबी का लांछन है, जो उनका उस टाइम का समाज है उसमें जिसकी एग्जिस्टेंस है। कहीं पर कृत्तिवास ओझा जी की जो किताब है उसमें उसने रावण का चित्र उकेर दिया है। तो जो रामकीयन रामायण है उसमें कैकेयी की बेटी ने उससे एक चित्र बनवा दिया है, तो एक और कैरेक्टर बढ़ गया है कि कैकेयी की एक पुत्री भी है। अब इसमें फैंटेसी सीता के जन्म से लेकर उसके मरण तक शामिल है। भूमि से उत्पन्न होना एक फैंटेसी है, लेकिन जीवन का यथार्थ की समझ उसकी अपनी है। और धरती में समा जाना अगली फैंटेसी है, लेकिन उसके फिक्शन का जो सच है वो अपनी जगह पर है कि स्त्री का जो दुख है वो भूमि से निकल जाने जैसी वेदना के साथ भूमि में समा जाने जैसे दुख के बीच में कहीं उलझी हुई है। उसकी दुनिया भूमिजा से भूमि में जाने तक सीमित है। इसी तरह एक छोटा प्रसंग और है कर्ण के बहा देने का, कर्ण परित्याग का। व्यास जी ने अलग लिखा है, दिनकर जी ने अलग लिखा है, और कर्ण की वेदना को रविंद्रनाथ ठाकुर साहब ने अलग किया है कर्ण कुंती संवाद में। मैं 1.5 मिनट में ख़त्म कर दूंगा प्लीज़। तो इस तरह से जो या स्वर्गारोहण का जो चैप्टर है उसको व्यास जी ने अलग देखा, नरेंद्र शर्मा जी ने द्रौपदी में अलग देखा, और कल यहाँ पर थे मृत्युंजय कुमार सिंह जी, उन्होंने अपने खंड काव्य जैसी काव्य ग्रंथ में अलग देखा, वो जो उनकी यात्रा है। लेकिन मेरा ये मानना है कि बिना फिक्शन के फैंटेसी की संभावना नहीं, इसलिए दोनों एक दूसरे की मदद भी करते हैं। और इसकी जो पूरी अवधारणा है वो चाहते हुए भी न चाहते हुए भी इसका एक यथार्थ है, वो चाहे कहानियों में हो, चाहे उपन्यास में हो, चाहे कविता में हो या पौराणिक कथाओं में हो। मुझे लगता है सर मेरा समय पूरा हो गया है, और अगर मैंने कुछ नहीं कहा होगा तो आप मुझे होटल चल के कुछ कहिएगा मत, मैं यहीं बोल दे रहा हूँ। थैंक यू, नमस्ते।
धन्यवाद सर, जितने अच्छे से आपने एलोबरेट किया और जिस तरह आप बता रहे थे सचमुच मन कर रहा था हम लोग इसको भी अब बहुत देर तक सुन सकते हैं, बहुत देर तक बहुत कुछ और आप बताते हैं, लेकिन अभी हमारे साथ समय की बाध्यता है तो माफ़ी भी चाहूँगी, लेकिन हम लोग चाहेंगे कि 10 मिनट के अंदर में आप अपनी जितनी बातें रख सके वहाँ वाइंड अप कर लें तो अच्छा होगा। हालांकि ये विषय ऐसा होता है साहित्य की, अंतहीन होता है इस पर विचार विमर्श करना। अगला स्वागत है अनुजा चंद्रमौली जी का। अनुजा चंद्रमौली एक लोकप्रिय लेखिका और नए युग की भारतीय शास्त्रीय विदुषी हैं, जिन्हें पौराणिक कथाओं, ऐतिहासिक कथाओं और फैंटेसी के सबसे बेहतरीन लेखकों में से एक माना जाता है। आपकी 14 पुस्तकें प्रकाशित हैं। आपके पहले उपन्यास अर्जुन, एक पांडव योद्धा राजकुमार की गाथा को 2012 में अमेजन इंडिया द्वारा शीर्ष 5 बेस्ट सेलर पुस्तक में से एक के रूप में नामित किया गया था। आपकी पुस्तक मोहिनी द एन्चेंट्रेस 2021 में जेके पेपर्स और टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया पॉपुलर चॉइस लेखक पुरस्कार की विजेता रही। आपकी पुस्तकें ऑडियो बुक के रूप में भी उपलब्ध हैं और हिंदी में अनुदित की गई हैं। आपकी नवीनतम पुस्तक द वाइफ एंड द डांसिंग गर्ल है, जो तमिल क्लासिक शिल्पदिकारम का एक साहसिक संशोधन परक रूप है। आप एक प्रशिक्षित भरतनाट्यम नर्तकी भी हैं। बहुत स्वागत मैम।
Namaskaram to one and all present here. Dhruvaji asked us to define fantasy, fiction, and Dhruvaji, I'm very sorry, mujhe maaf karti ho, but I'm very, very weak with definitions. That is why I'm a storyteller. To make sense of things, to explain things, I rely only on the stories. And in today's world, the question is, how relevant is the story? Because first of all, it's a world that is dominated by social media. Social media has stolen our attention. It is not going to give it back. We are all addicted to our phones. Even in the audience, even here, we cannot sit without our phones. It's become an extension of our right hand. It is a social media dominated age. As if that threat is not bad enough, you have AI. We've outsourced everything to the apps and AI, whether it's love, sex, relationships, friendship, whatever it is, we have outsourced it to AI. The apps rule all. Another serious threat, we've let the machines take over to think for us, to do everything for us. And finally, human nature. It is such a divisive world, increasingly polarized. We cannot agree on anything. The genocide in Gaza, you'll think, everyone will say genocide is bad. But no, two sides. Some people support the war, some people don't. What about right here? The stray dog situation, it was in the news recently. I'm scared of dying of rabies. I have pets at home, but stray dogs scare me. But even that in India, we could not agree. And India-Pakistan situation, are they allowed to play cricket matches together? Are we allowed to watch it? What is happening? Can we agree? No. But still, I think one thing that unites all of us today, it's a good old-fashioned story. Stories still have power. We still kill each other over the stories. We still love the stories so much. We are still trying to change the world with one story at a time. What is the reason for this power of fantasy, magic, myth, story? What is the reason behind the potency of a story? One is a simple reason. It is fun. Human beings can put up with a lot of pain, but boredom we cannot endure. And stories stave off this boredom. Okay, and it's very educational, by the way. We learn a lot from the stories we consume. But the thing is, if you go tell a child, here is a textbook, it has invaluable knowledge, the child will fall asleep in 5 minutes. But you tell a story, they're interested, they're getting an education despite resisting every step of the way. Algebra, what practical application does algebra have? I'm still not able to understand. Those geometric theorems, they made me mug it all up. I'm still trying to figure out why they wasted my entire childhood with that. But stories, on the other hand, I'm all in. So I got an education from the stories despite my best efforts not to get educated. And that's how I built an entire career. Simple reason, for fun. Stories are so much fun, so much entertainment. What's the complex reason? In India, we have this belief, not just in India, but we believe in birth, rebirth. This cycle, never-ending cycle of life and death. Why is this happening? We say this is because we need to be born again and again and again to have a series of experiences which will help us evolve and eventually reach enlightenment. That is the idea. It's supposed to be a complicated process. You do bad things, you're going to be born as a lizard or a worm, they'll scare you like that. And they say the great sages, there's no shortcut for this, by the way, no shortcut for moksha. But the great sages, apparently all they have to do is sit comfortably under a tree, like the Bodhisattva did. Sit comfortably under a tree. It's not an easy process, but you go through all these lifetimes in your head itself. The dream, the reality, the fantasy, it's all getting blurred here, but you're experiencing all these lifetimes and the fantasy sets you free. So through stories, that's where the stories come in. When this gets blurred, this line between fantasy, reality, dream, through the stories, we are able to pack in so many experiences, so many lifetimes together, and the hope is that it will set us free. If it doesn't trap us for good, of course, if we don't get too worked up over the stories and kill each other over it, the path to moksha is right there. And when we are talking about this, I said I'm not bound by definitions, all of it. We are talking about the fluidity of stories. Nothing is set in stone over here. It is always subject to interpretation. And now, when we talk about interpretation, let's also talk about the fact that they tell us that the wisdom of the ages, it's all supposed to be contained in our stories, which is passed on to us. This is our actual inheritance. The treasure trove we have inherited over here. These stories, the wisdom distilled over the ages. As Sunil Krishnanji in the previous section, he talked about the flip side of things. There's a good side to everything, there's a dark side. So when it comes to this treasure trove we have inherited, there has been a tendency to gatekeep, to hoard this treasure trove by only some. They say, for instance, the Rig Veda. They say initially it wasn't considered a good idea to set it down in writing at all. India's oral tradition, you had to commit it to memory. You had to internalize the Rig Veda, which makes you a living, breathing embodiment of the Vedas, which is actually a very, very beautiful thing. No two ways about it. It is, they're talking about the effort you put in pursuit of the truth. That's lovely, no two ways about it. But the thing is, it sought to exclude. But they felt that the Rig Veda was so powerful that it shouldn't fall into the wrong hands. Who decides who the wrong hands are? Okay, non-believers, infidels, but women were also included. Those belonging to lower castes were also considered unworthy of the Rig Veda. So that was the flip side of it. The positive side, because of our oral tradition, this treasure trove of stories was very, very carefully preserved. We withstood the foreign invasions. In fact, we hear about ancient Inca, Mayan treasure troves of knowledge getting lost because the invaders destroyed everything. But because of our oral tradition, it was preserved. And again, the intention wasn't to exclude people. Those who cannot, expend that kind of time to memorize the Rig Veda, for them only the Puranas were there, the Itihasas were there. Mahabharata, Ramayana, The wisdom contained in the Vedas is also disseminated through the stories, and hence this love affair we have with the stories. And finally, I'll just conclude with one of my favorite stories from Tamil Nadu. It's about Rajaraja Chola. He's trending again, he's popular again. So in Rajaraja Chola's time, in his court, he had these Oduvars who used to come and sing the Devaram hymns, little bits and pieces of it, an appetizer. And he wanted more. He said, it's so beautiful. I want the entire Devaram hymns, the Tirumurai compiled properly. But they said, sorry, that is not allowed. All these scrolls have been preserved very carefully in the Chidambaram Nadarajar temple, and this door can be opened only when three of the foremost Nayanmars, okay, they were Tirunjana Sambandar, Appar and Sundarar. These three who were dead and gone for centuries, they have to come and present themselves in the temple. Only then will we open the gate. Only then can these scrolls be retrieved. And Rajaraja Cholan was a practical man. Okay? So what he did was he had 3 golden statues sculpted, consecrated and paraded in front of the temple. The Dikshitars protested. They said, you are cheating. And he said, then you are also cheating. If you are worshipping Nadaraja's idol and calling it God, then I am not cheating either. If you remove the idol, then I will get rid of mine. And so a happy compromise was reached. He's still a king, you know. He gets his way. And they found all these Devaram hymns, but the termites, all the insects had been at the scrolls, and he was a little sad about it. And at that point, Nambi Iyer, yes. Nambi Iyer, who had helped him retrieve the scrolls, he said, don't mourn what is gone. Okay, that is how time works. What is needed for an age will always be preserved. It is in your hands how you choose to use this knowledge which has been so painstakingly preserved over the centuries. So always the story, it's not to blame for all the stunts we humans pull on each other, the storytellers. And storytellers have their good and bad qualities, so let's not be too hard on them either. So I hope I helped you all make a little sense of what we are trying to do with our fantasy worlds over here. Thank you very, very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Anuja ma'am, to elaborate this topic so nicely with the storytelling. And what do I think about the fabrication of the literature that we have started from the Arabian Nights? Arabian Nights have been depicted on the Shakespeare and then in the Hindi stories and then came to Bollywood. So it's a fabrication and a complete journey from here, there, all over the world, all the languages. So very nice. Thank you so much. Now, I request to K.V. Mohan Kumar sir. K.V. Mohan Kumar is a fiction writer in Malayalam with 38 books, including 10 novels and 13 collections of short stories. To his credit, he has been recognized with the Kerala Sahitya Academy Award, Vailar Award, Kerala State Bala Sahitya Award, among others. He served as sub-editor and staff correspondent in leading Malayalam dailies for 12 years. So most welcome, K.V. Mohan Kumar sir.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. The subject of our discussion today is very relevant and topical. I congratulate Sahitya Academy for having chosen such a very new and vibrant topic. Our question today is regarding paradigm shift in fiction writing in the context of fantasy fiction writing, blending mythology, folklore, and speculative elements. In this context, I think the most apt and insightful definition given to novel as well as fiction writing is by renowned writer Milan Kundera in his fascinating book, The Curtain. It's not an old definition. It was coined within last 12 to 13 years, most probably after the birth of Harry Potter. In his article, Art of Novel, Milan Kundera says, novel is a magical curtain. Novel is a magic curtain woven of legends hung before the world. Novel is a magic curtain woven of legends hung before the world. He called it magic curtain because it is woven of legends, myths, preconceptions, and speculative elements. And he says the task of a novelist or a writer, fiction writer, is to find out suitable motive for his fiction or novel, whatever it be, from this magic curtain woven of legends. But at the same time, Milan Kundera emphasizes that a novelist or a fiction writer is not a historian, nor a prophet, but an explorer of human existence and human explorer of complexities of life, an explorer of predicaments of life. What a profound statement. And being explorer of human existence, the writer is delving into the human conditions. He is uncovering the complexities of life and revealing insights that resonates with the readers. That's why we say writers write from the perspective of time. All writers are writing from the perspective of time. When a writer pens their thoughts from the perspective of time, they embark on a profound exploration of human existence and predicament. In this juncture, let us examine what is happening in fantasy fiction writing today by reimagining traditional tales, blending mythology, folklore, speculative elements, etc., etc. Of course, fantasy fiction offers wide spectrum of Indian as well as global audiences, I agree. That's a positive part of it. So the question of paradigm shift is very relevant in this context. And we have clear examples before us for that. Let's just take the case of Asura, the Tale of Vanquished, written by Anand Neelakandan. It's a very fantastic, very wonderful work, very spellbound. I have read it long back. We know it has been translated into almost all the Indian languages and foreign languages, including Sinhalese, Japanese, Indonesian, and so on. And more than 1 million copies have been sold over a period of 10 years. And it has been included in the list of 100 must-read novels by Amazon Books. That's the popularity, that's the acceptance received by the book. And the same is the case with the Shiva trilogy by Amish Tripathi, and also the Kalki trilogy by Kevin Misal. And so many other notable works in the genre like Chitra Banerjee's The Forest Enchantments, Hindu Sundaration's The Mountain of Light, Akshat Gupta's The Hidden Hindu Trilogy, and Naga Warriors, and so on. I don't want to list all the names of all the books due to want of time. But I think ultimately books of this genre fail to portray the complexities of human life. That's the main thing. That's a different perspective I would like to present. If we go back to our literature, we have gifted writers like R.K. Narayan, Amitabh Ghosh, Arundhati Roy, Salman Rushdie, and Anita Desai, etc., who had brought magical realism and supernatural themes into their writings. They also applied magical realism and supernatural themes. They blended those things with their writings. For example, R.K. Narayan's The Guide, it's a blend of mysticism and realism. And Arundhati Roy's God of Small Things, it incorporates magical realism while exploring themes of family bond and social hierarchy in the backdrop of a remote Kerala village called Aymanam. So, in the Ibis trilogy. I think I'm not sure whether my pronunciation is correct, whether it is Ibis or Ibis. The Ibis, I think it's the Ibis. The Ibis trilogy by Amitav Ghosh. It also incorporates supernatural and historical elements. It's a blend of historical facts and fictional narrative. But see, these works occasionally incorporates fantasy and mythology elements, exploring themes of identity and cultural elements, cultural heritage. So, blurring the lines between reality and fantasy has always existed in contemporary Indian literature even before. If I take the case of our own language, Malayalam, I am proud to say that we have a very rich tradition of fiction writing, interweaving fantasy as well as folklore elements. For example, Randamuzham, the second turn by M.T. renowned writer who is no more, M.T. Vasudevan Nair. It's a retelling of Mahabharata from the perspective of Bhima. It explores themes of love, betrayal, honor, and redemption through Bhima's journey. But the humiliation and the rejection faced by Bhima is depicted as something that we experience in today's life. That's the difference. You know, Bhima acts as the character of Bhima is depicted as a universal character. It happens everywhere in the world. That's the connection between the human life. But that is not the case with the so-called fantasy fiction writing, blending mythology and speculative elements with an eye on market saturation and population. That is what we are seeing in the case of other fantasy works. They are aiming on market saturation and popularity. I definitely agree that fantasy fiction writing has indeed become a vibrant and evolving genre in contemporary Indian literature. That is true, 100% true. It has attracted a new wave of readers, particularly among the younger generations, who are drawn to imaginative storytelling and epic worlds. That's a good thing, very, very positive thing. See, fantasy fiction has contributed to the evolution of Indian literature, pushing boundaries and redefining the genre. I'm concluding, but I don't believe that this paradigm shift would promise a brighter future for a value-based literature unless its roots do not go deep into contemporary human life. Unless its roots go deep into contemporary human life, its predicaments and its complexities. That's a failure I see with this types of fantasy fiction. That's the drawback, main drawback. So to conclude, I would like to say that fantasy fiction, no matter what era it tells, whether it is last century or whether it is 10 centuries back, whenever the story happens, whatever story they portray, it can survive as a great work of art only if it can connect to the complexities and realities of human life. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, Academy.
Thank you so much, sir. And the thing is, the gist, we are talking about the fantasy. So the most thing, anyhow, whatever I'm listening, कि कहीं ना कहीं आपको जो सच्चाई से ज़्यादा वो फैंटेसी पॉपुलर होती है, and the most burning example, that is Harry Potter. That's it. So now, मुकुल कुमार, स्वागत है आपका. मुकुल कुमार प्रशासक, उपन्यासकार और कवि हैं. आप भारतीय रेलवे यातायात सेवा के सिविल सेवक हैं और वर्तमान में रेल मंत्रालय के रेलवे बोर्ड में कार्यरत हैं. आपकी प्रकाशित रचनाओं में 3 उपन्यास एज बॉयज बिकम मेन, सेडक्शन बाय ट्रुथ और आरजू अर्शन ई बुक तथा 3 कविता संग्रह द इरेस्प्रेसिबल, इकोज, कैथारसिस और रिदम ऑफ द रूइंस शामिल हैं। आपको भारतीय रेलवे में उत्कृष्ट सेवा के लिए राष्ट्रीय पुरस्कार, साहित्यिक उत्कृष्टता के लिए भारत निर्माण पुरस्कार और पूर्वांचल गौरव सम्मान से अलंकृत किया जा चुका है। बहुत स्वागत है सर।
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. At the outset, let me extend my heartfelt thanks to Sahitya Academy to give this opportunity, for giving this opportunity to connect with the literature lovers. And as per the demand of the chair, that all the speakers have to begin with defining, fantasy fiction. So I will echo the views of Bodhisattva ji that, I also treat like fiction. The chief instrument of fiction is imagination, and fantasy somehow I find to be subset of fiction, because imagination not only encircles the universe, it encircles the universe beyond universe. So that is what you are doing here. Fiction can take you anywhere, and fantasy is a subset of fiction. And at the outset, I will clarify what fantasy fiction means to me. It subsumes the use of fantasy also in fiction. Fiction may not be called a fantasy fiction, but it has copious, references of, the world of fantasy, the mythology. And to me, to my understanding, broadly, there are two categories of, fantasy fiction. When I subsume this usage of fantasy also in fiction, first is where context and characters are both dominated by fantastical elements. To illustrate with the example, like in the medieval times when we go, William Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, the way that takes you into the world of fairies, and the way so seamlessly it has been blended with the realm of reality. So these are the mere induction of fairies mirrors the complex human emotions like, love, jealousy, and illusion. And second, drawing reference from the current times, of course, Hobbit and Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. One of the most famous, fiction writers. He conceives the Middle Earth. That is that is a world beyond human realm. And of course, Harry Potter we have been talking about. Harry Potter takes you into the world of magic and wizardry. So. So basically, fantasy fiction, or a fiction that has copious references from, the world of fantasy. Basically, first type is where the writer conceives the realm beyond human realm. And second, when the writer resorts to the fantasy and the mythology that is pre-existing. So that is why, Indian fiction, talking about, contemporary Indian fiction, we are seeing how the whole, like our mythology is being mined and explored to tell the human realities. And then coming to fantasy fiction, like can we take fantasy to be antonym of reality? Here again, let us hear from what the greatest of the fiction writers of the contemporary times have to tell. Tolkien says, no, it is not an escape from the reality. Basically, it is a tool to deepen the human understanding of the reality of the, understanding of the human reality. So I fully echo, and there are other writers like Lloyd Alexander and Ursula Le Guin. Both echo the views of J.R.R. Tolkien. So here are the fiction writers who are trying to tell you, who take you into the world of fantasy, not as an escape from the reality, not from an escape from the trials and tribulations of human existence, but they are trying to tell the reality through a much more engaging and interesting way. And here, I believe the task of the fiction writer becomes much easier when he resorts into fantasy, because it is one of the finest and the easiest ways to engage the audience, engage the readers into what you are going to tell them. And coming to like contemporary, we are talking about contemporary, Indian fiction, Indian fantasy fiction. So I think the broadly Indian contemporary fiction has made predominant usage of the mythology, Indian mythology, folklores, myths, legends that are being offered by Indian mythology, and in these in this mythology, pioneering in terms of usage are the two epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata. Ramayana and Mahabharata. So I shall limit myself to Indian mythology, because, and the greater advantage, Indian mythology has a greater advantage because it is sacred, it wears a divine halo, and it not only stimulates mind, it stirs your heart, it touches your soul. So the task of the writer becomes quite easy when he is trying to depict certain realities through these epics. And now I will illustrate it when I reflect upon, this fantasy fiction being written in India or anywhere in the world, I find there are three basic objectives. There are three basic objectives of the writer. First is to seek validation of the truth he is trying to tell you, illustrating it with the example, like when you talk of the transfiguration of Krishna, Virat Rupa of Krishna, in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, then you are trying to profess, you are trying to prop up your theory of karma. You are trying to prop up your conception of soul that you are trying to offer to the readers. So this is again, and all these objectives which I am going to enlist, three broad objectives, have one common goal: to make human existence better and to make this world more humane. So here, this theory of karma is a great instrument to bring peace and sanity to the human existence. And then soul, conception of soul, of course. And secondly, I think it is a very remarkable thing that mythology has been refuted also quite often, contradicted also quite often. And this we do in order to foster critical thinking, in order to inculcate the scientific temper, which is so very crucial to human existence at times. So, and here I will again give the example of I think those fiction writers will quite agree with me that Rama inflicting Agni Pariksha upon Sita have been vehemently questioned by feminist historians. So here you are not only celebrating, you are not only upholding mythology, you are questioning also here. So that is also very crucial. And third broad way in which this fantasy has been used is like you neither agree with it nor contradict it. You remain within the framework of the mythology, and then you reinterpret, you re-examine it, and you retell it to the audience. Again, I will come back to the feminist historians, the way the characters of Draupadi, Sita, and all sort of female characters are being reinvented from the feminist perspective. That is what is, I think it is the most popular genre talking about contemporary Indian fiction. So like Ahilya also is being reinvented. So, and these reinterpretations, and why is it being reinterpreted? Because it is again basically meant to serve the human cause, make this life better. They are meant to profess the gender equality. That is why you are doing. Feminism is one of the, I think, one of the most important and crucial social movements of the current times. So, and now let me illustrate it with the examples from the contemporary Indian fiction, how Indian fiction writers have used it. So talking about Raja Rao's Kantapura, the freedom struggle, it talks of the freedom struggle, Gandhian satyagraha based upon non-violence and satyagraha against the British Empire, and the analogy has been drawn between Rama's crusade, Rama's march against Ravan. The moment you do that, the moment you take the readers into that realm, it is the instant way to foster the patriotic sentiments. You lend that divine halo to the Gandhian struggle against the British Empire. And secondly, R.K. Narayan, the man-eater of Malgudis. Again, he talks there of, he depicts the world in terms of like evil versus good. And that is a recurrent theme. That is an eternal theme that will never grow obsolete. The entire endeavor of the human civilization is to establish good over evil. That is what R.K. Narayan is doing there. And in order to scientifically organize life, again, he has drawn the reference through the character of Chandran, the 4 stages of life. Like Brahmacharya, we talk about Brahmacharya, and then Garhastha, and then Vanprastha Sannyas, and so on and so forth. Shashi Tharoor again, the great Indian novel he writes, and there he has made like reference to Mahabharata in order to criticize, emergency and uphold democracy. So again, all such realities that are meant to make human life better, this world more humane, and you are trying to resort to fantasy in order to tell the truth. And coming to that, again, I will illustrate that example of feminist perspective, say, jo reinterpretation and re-examinations are being done in this, regard. Chitra Divyakondi is a prominent, I think, pioneer author. Palace of Illusions. She is watching Draupadi from the eyes of, watching Mahabharata from the eyes of Draupadi. Again, to profess that gender equality, again to discover the autonomy and an agency, resurrect, reclaim and revive those voices, feminist voices that have been silenced by history and time. That is what she is trying to do. And then Kavita's Kane, lesser known character she explores, Urmila. We talk about Sita, we talk about how, Sita had to suffer, and nobody thinks that Lakshmana accompanied Rama and how Urmila must be suffering there in the palace. So, I will just conclude by saying that folklores and myths have a long enduring relationship with literature. So, it is meant basically to make our existence better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. You have touched so many points and so relevant points over here, especially our mythology, that is fiction, that is fantasy, but our mythology and so important factor of our lives. Thank you so much. And now, अब मैं स्वागत करती हूँ हमारे बीच निर्मल कांति भट्टाचार्य जी हैं। निर्मल कांति भट्टाचार्य जी सर साहित्य अकादमी के पूर्वी क्षेत्र के क्षेत्रीय कार्यालय कोलकाता के क्षेत्रीय सचिव और नेशनल बुक ट्रस्ट इंडिया के निदेशक रह चुके हैं। बाद में आपने साहित्य अकादमी के द्वैमासिक पत्र का इंडियन लिटरेचर के संपादक के रूप में भी कार्य किया। आप के बिड़ला फाउंडेशन नई दिल्ली के निदेशक भी रहे हैं। रविंद्रनाथ टैगोर, महाश्वेता देवी, सुनील गंगोपाध्याय, माणिक बंदोपाध्याय और शीर्षेंदु मुखोपाध्याय की कहानियों के आपके अंग्रेजी अनुवाद का सभी ने बहुत स्वागत किया। आपने UR अनंतमूर्ति के एक कन्नड़ कहानी संग्रह और विश्वास पाटिल के एक मराठी उपन्यास का बांग्ला में अनुवाद भी किया है। बहुत स्वागत है सर आपका।
Mr. Chairman, my fellow panelists and friends, I was under the impression that like Sahitya Academy seminars, I am to write down a paper of 15-20 minutes and read it out in here. But the pattern looks a little different. Still, I jotted down certain lines which I would not want to go waste. So I'm reading it out to you, and my appeal to you: stop me whenever you want. Okay. But I would like to, Mr. Chairman, I may not be able to define exactly the fantasy fiction, but I would like to make a differentiation between fantasy fiction as we understand Indians and the fantasy fiction which is a genre in Western literature. Among the many forms taken by the imaginary in creative, in literature, the use of fantasy and the marvelous has stretched the creative potential to the farthest reaches of the impossible. The ability to conceptualize people, places, and situations that are beyond the ken of ordinary experiences and yet fascinate by their tenuous links to the substance of our human life makes the form of fantasy a most attractive medium for addressing reality in a tangent. For us, the marvelous is often the agency for carrying entertainment as well as social message, conservative as well as radical politics, stereotyping as well as ironic deflation. From the Dastan of Amir Hamza to Salman Rushdie's Haroun and the Sea of Stories, there are parallels and contrasts that can be drawn. Further resources from the popular mythologies, chapbooks, cartoons, and ghostly tales can demonstrate the scope of the field of inquiry. Our chairman mentioned Tolkien. Mukul Kumar also mentioned Tolkien. So I would also like to say that Tolkien actually it rejuvenated fantasy fiction as a branch in the Western literary tradition by his beginning with The Hobbit, and then later on his other book, this famous Lord of the Rings, dark noir novel. And then Tolkien was ably supported by C.S. Lewis, his friend, and some other friends who established an organization called Inklings. And through Inklings, they used to publish these fantasy fictions. And C.S. Lewis, as we all know, the Chronicle of Narnia is also a very famous thing. I would think that the kind of efflorescence in fantasy fiction that was brought in the Western literature by Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, same kind of thing was done by Amish Tripathi in the post-liberation area. Before Amish, of course, Devdutt Patnaik was writing, Anand Nilkantan was writing, but in the post-liberation area, Amish Tripathi with his Shiva trilogy virtually revolutionized the fantasy fiction in India. And there comes my point, how it differentiates from the Western concept. Because we are talking of gods and demons and others, whom we still venerate. We are lampooning gods whom we are still worshipping. But in Western tradition, it is not so. In Western tradition, in fantasy, if you use a Madonna or if you use Venus, you can do anything you want to do because there is no worship going on in the present context. So no question of blasphemy will arise anywhere. So I'm coming to that. To speak of Indian fantasy writing in any overarching way is to confront a peculiar form of cultural translation, one that operates not merely between languages and dialects, but between temporal registers. That means between the archaic and the contemporary, between the sacred and the secular. This is a literature that must constantly negotiate its relationship to what one might call the visual consciousness. Just to borrow the register of Gita Kapoor, that where gods appear in calendar art, where epic narratives unfold in television serials, when the mythic becomes commodity and the commodity becomes mythic. The conventional Western taxonomy of fantasy, science fiction, speculative fiction, and magic realism also becomes unstable when applied to Indian writing, revealing the culture specificity of genre categories that often masquerade as universal literary forms. How does one distinguish science fiction from speculative fiction in the Western sense of the term? In India, we cannot make this distinction because when traditional cosmological systems already contain concepts of multiple universes, concept of time dilation, concept of consciousness transfer, all these are there. We are not creating anything. A popular strain of thought in Hindu mythology is that the universe is only a dream of Mahavishnu as he is suspended in a bed of cosmic sleep or Maya. So it is quite a feat to imagine and catalogue the narrative possibilities when generation after generation of children are brought up on the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and the Panchatantra. Mukul Kumar also mentioned it. With talking trees and dancing lions, and what other cultures treat as fantasy? Other cultures treat as fantasy, like gods walking among mortals, animals espousing wisdom, time flowing backward. These are fantasies are treated by the other cultures, but in our cultures, these forms the bedrock of lived religion and cultural experience. The boundaries between these genres in Indian writing reflect not just different not just different narrative techniques, but different ways of understanding the relationship between the possible and the actual, between the rational and the mystical. In broad strokes, what I'm trying to say is that where Western fantasy often builds secondary world from the scratch, Indian fantasy tends to work through reinterpretation, taking existing mythological frameworks and finding new angles of entry. This creates a peculiar density of reference that can be overwhelming for uninitiated readers, but can be deeply satisfying for those us who can catch the references, who can catch the allusions. Perhaps most significantly, Indian fantasy's relationship to religious material remains uniquely complex. While Western fantasy can treat gods as fictional constructs, Indian fantasy must navigate the fact that its divine characters remain objects of contemporary worship. This has led to a kind of cultural diplomacy, writing stories that honor tradition while transforming it, that respect belief while encouraging skepticism. But the true archaeology of Indian fantasy begins not with contemporary bestsellers, but with the, I'll like to, nobody has dwelt much on the regional literature as far as fantasy is concerned, so I'd like to dwell upon it briefly. But the true archaeology of Indian fantasy begins not with contemporary bestsellers, but with the regional language pioneers who understood that ancient stories demanded modern telling. They created a space where the mythic could coexist with the mundane. A cow might be just a ruminating mammal you try not to swerve into, or it might mean the Vahan of God also, depending on the perspective of observation. You know, the ambiguity became central to Indian fantasy's aesthetics. Hence, the most significant untapped resource for Indian fantasy, I will argue, lies in the rich tradition of regional literature, regional writing that remains largely unknown to the English language readers and speakers. Each major Indian language has developed distinctive approaches to the fantastic that reflect specific cultural conditions and aesthetic tradition. A few examples. For example, the Hindi, the work of the Bikinandan Khatri, it was mentioned by Bodhisattva ji also. Now, my question is, it deserves more recognition than it receives. His Chandrakanta series, written long back in the 1880s, created a template for Indian fantasy that combined palace intrigue, magic, and romantic adventure in ways that predicted much of contemporary Indian fantasy's obsession. That it was dismissed, Bodhisattva ji, as mere entertainment says more about literary hierarchy than about literary merit. At least I would like to believe that. In Tamil literature, Chandramouli will be able to bear me out, Kalki Krishnamurti's Paneer Salivinin. Now, Paneer Salivinin, written in the mid-20th century, established the template. What template? Historical fiction so saturated with legend that it transcended both the genres of historical fiction and this thing. Here was a writer who grasped that Indian fantasy would always be palimpsest, new stories written over the old, visible through the gaps. Similarly, Marathi tradition has produced writers like P.L. Deshpande, whose humorous sketches often feature fantastic elements that emerge from close observation of middle-class social behavior. Deshpande's ability to find the absurd and surreal. I'll take 2 minutes only to cover Bengali. Absurd and surreal, written ordinary fantasy, ordinary family life suggests approaches to fantasy writing that could be ground the genre in specific social contexts rather than abstract mythological systems. My last portion is a few examples from Bengali. The Bengali contribution became known through Satyajit Roy, whose Professor Shanku series, stories and Feluda mysteries contained fantasy elements that seemed to emerge naturally from the landscape. Ray understood something that took English language fantasy writers decades to understand, that the fantastic need not announce itself with trumpets and prophecies. It could slip in sideways through the cracks in everyday reality, whether through the hungry septopus or the transformation of a hapless chap into a colonial era gentleman. But before Ray, we had Tailokonath Mukhopadhyay, who lived and worked during the 19th and early 20th centuries. A Victorian Bengali, he was creating what we would now identify as magical realist techniques, decades before the term was coined. His approach was distinctive in the blend of scientific curiosity and imaginative speculation, with its fusion of tall tales, satire, science, myth, politics, and the absurd. His writings, like the stories of Kankabati, Domrucharit, Lullu, and others, also announced the emergence of this genre of modern fantasy in Bengali. Then there is Leela Majumdar, writing in the mid-20th century, who created children's fantasy that drew on Bengali folklore while addressing the social transformation of 20th century urban life. Drawing on the Bengali tradition of supernatural fictions, she has produced forms of ghost story and psychological horror, like the Podipician Barbie Baksha, Sob Bhuture, the Yellow Bird, and others that operate according to different conventions than either Western horror or Pan-Indian mythology. And finally, I would like to mention Shichendu Bandyopadhyay. Finally, I would like to mention Shishendu Mukhopadhyay, who is still alive in his late 80s. He has created a body of fantasy works largely unknown outside Bengali. His approach to the fantastic, often rooted in local folklore rather than in Pan-Indian mythology, suggests alternative path for the genre's development. It is not for nothing that his fantasy stories like The Ghost of Gusai Bagan or Monojder Odbhut Bari have attained almost cult status in Bengali literature. I dwelt a little details on Bengali fantasy, not because I am a parochial Bengali, but I sincerely believe that the Bengali tradition was particularly innovative because it developed during a period of intense cultural negotiation between indigenous traditions and Western education, between scientific rationalism and traditional cosmology, between colonial administration and emerging nationalist radicalism. Writers from this silsila navigated these tensions by creating hybrid forms that could accommodate multiple worldviews simultaneously. Thank you very much.
So this is time to conclude. Yes, and thank you so much, sir, for this. Before concluding and handing over to Bora sir, I want to say something about this fantasy because this is so close to my heart. क्योंकि हम लोग बहुत कॉमिक्स पढ़ के बड़े हुए हैं. We are talking about Harry Potter, we are talking about Devaki Nandan Khatri's Chandrakanta. So there was a time all over the language across the world we are seeing the fantasies in the childhood stories कि एक जादूगर था, he is having a magical mirror, एक जादू का आईना और वो किसी से बातें कर लेता था. Somehow these fantasies, these child stories are connected to, doesn't connected to science and the future. हमारे पास आज वीडियो कॉलिंग है एंड वी आर डूइंग द सेम थिंग विच मैजिशियंस वो डूइंग एज देयर विच इज़ वी आर डूइंग। तब की बात है, वो ग्लोब में देख करके बताती थी कि कौन कहाँ पे है। सो वी आर हैविंग गूगल, वी कैन सर्च एनीथिंग एंड इन दैट वे ऑल्सो चंद्रकांता में कोई भी किसी का रूप ले लेता है, एनीबडी कैन लाइक in a disguise. So we are having AI over here. So this is something connected and it's a very interesting topic. So sir, please conclude.
So before I conclude this particular session, anybody from the audience would like to put in a word? Yes, please. Please come up. Can I be given a mic?
Hello.
Thank you, sir. So first one is, so most of you talked about the history or mythology being written as fantasy fiction, at least by contemporary authors nowadays. So first thing is, are we assuming things when we say that we are fantasizing it, especially when it comes to history and mythology? And secondly, are we only, so generally, I mean, these days, most of the readership is in English for fantasy fiction. That's the second part. So are we limiting it to the English as a language for that? And I'll just club all the questions together so it is one time, one thing done. Also, are the Indian fantasy authors that much pressured to write in the way that aligns with Western fantasy expectations? As few of you mentioned about the maybe Potter or maybe the Lord of Rings or something else. And is the Indian reader more comfortable with reimagining the past rather than imagining the new worlds altogether? Thank you.
So, Dada, please. Please.
Anyone who would like to take it up?
No, Dada will
I think there is a the young gentleman has bunched too many questions together, so some of them have gone above my head. But I would correct you by saying that fantasy writing is not just for English language literature. It was there always in the regional languages. If you read stories by Indira Goswami in Asomia, you will find a lot of interesting fantasy writing is there. So, and I talked about Bengali and Marathi and Tamil a little. So, but then, yes, I understand why you asked this question, because maybe English is more visible and English fantasy fiction gets more publicity. That is why you have got this wrong notion.
One thing Dada has very ably brought out is that very rich tradition of fantasy fiction in regional literatures of India, which we were not focusing today initially. So that aspect, that heritage, we will have to keep in mind when we speak about fantasy fiction. And in one particular novel is being so much quoted, Chandrakanta. That is in regional language. That is not in English. So that is one initial modern day fantasy fiction in India ever produced. I would like to, so we are coming to the end of the session, and I will just wrap it up. I am so grateful to the eminent panelists, each coming from different background, and with it bringing such a valuable contribution of their experiences into this particular, their thoughts into this particular genre. For me, see, I am not very much very positive about writing fantasy fiction for writing a fantasy fiction's sake. Why not? Yesterday I was talking to one of my very young writer friends. There I outlined some of my beliefs. Say what new writers or what a genre of writing has to do. Number one, it has to question all the established values, persons, their writings, their achievement, whether it is being done or can be done with fantasy fiction. Second, it has to rebel against established forms, established truths that we are holding to be sacrosanct truths are not so. We have to rebel, especially the young ones, against these in the literature. Third, you have to be always aware that your endeavor as a writer, whichever genre you represent, must, in a society like India, where there are innumerable communities without any voice, as a writer, your writing has to give voice to them. And unless it can be done, writing has got no societal effect. So with these three, I have told him, my friend, 5 or 6, but I am now concentrating only on 3. Another thing, Burishatta, subversion. You have to subvert the established order. So fantasy fiction, to certain extent, in certain situation, does this, questions, subverts, ये सब तो करते हैं, लेकिन उसका मकसद है वो नहीं है. मकसद है मनोरंजन, basically. So you have to make this distinction. With these words, thank you, all of you, my eminent panelists and the audience who have stayed. This is not an easy subject. It cannot be a very popular subject too also, as is quite apparent. But you have stayed, and your presence have made the whole endeavor quite worthwhile. Thank you. Thank you.